liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Hello and welcome to TV on TV. I'm State Representative Tommy Vitolo. You're watching Brookline Interactive Group. Today is Thursday, June 19th, and we have a great show for you today. We have the second part of a two-part series with Advisory Committee Chair Dennis Doughty, and today we're going to talk about the policy decisions that were made by town meeting just a few weeks ago. Last week, we talked about the money. This week, it's all about the policy. And so I hope you will stay tuned for that. But first, as always, we'll lead off with the news. United States Senate Majority Leader John Thune hopes to take votes on the GOP mega bill next week. Currently, several Republican senators have expressed concerns over cuts to Medicare, clean energy tax credits, and impacts on rural hospitals. After airstrikes from Israel against Iran, President Donald Trump is weighing U.S. involvement in the conflict. Federal officers arrested New York City comptroller and New York City mayoral candidate Brad Lander yesterday at an immigration court after he demanded to see a warrant and linked arms with a person authorities were attempting to detain. This comes after ICE agents put California Senator Alex Padilla in handcuffs last week for interrupting Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem's press conference. Massachusetts is set to receive $105 million from a settlement with Purdue Pharma from a lawsuit brought against the company due to its involvement in the opioid crisis. State public health officials said they have detected the first positive mosquito sample for West Nile virus, putting Massachusetts slightly ahead of previous trends. Governor Maura Healey appointed Judge Jennifer Allen to the appeals court, addressing all vacancies on the appellate bench. The Brookline School Committee unanimously voted to appoint Bella Wong, a former science teacher and Brookline native, to serve as interim superintendent for the 2025-2026 school year. Brookline police are investigating a hate crime after a brick with the words "Free Palestine" was thrown through the window of the Butchery, a Jewish grocery store in Coolidge Corner, early Sunday morning. Police say several people wearing masks threw the brick through the window and fled on foot down Coolidge Street. The Brookline High School boys volleyball team clinched the state championship for the first time since 1992. Folks, that's the news. I hope you'll stay tuned. On the flip side, we'll have a great pre-recorded conversation with Dennis Doughty, chair of the advisory committee, about the policies that town meeting passed just a few weeks ago in the most recent town meeting. So stay tuned to TV on TV only on Brookline Interactive Group. And we're back for part two of what we hope will be a two-part series covering Brookline's town meeting. Town meeting got over about a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, and we're very grateful to have back Dennis Doughty, chair of the advisory committee. Part one, we aired last week where we focused on budgetary items, the budget and CPA. And now we want to get into the policy. We want to get into the bylaws and resolutions. And we've got a whole nother show to do it. If you want to complain that I never change, my wife complains about that too. But also, we did film this back to back from last week, and that's why I've got the same coat and tie. Let's move on. Dennis, thanks for coming back to Brookline Interactive Group for another show.
Thank you for having me. I always look forward to this.
So as I said, we did the budget. I want to move on to non-budget items. And I think the easiest thing to do is, at least at first blush, kind of take them in the order that they happen to be on the warrant. And so I'd like to start with warrant articles 14 and 15. 14 and 15 were citizen petitions, that is to say, a person who is not in town meeting, who resides in Brookline, got the necessary signatures to require the Brookline town meeting to discuss an issue that mattered to her. And it's essentially the process for authorizing home modifications for persons with disabilities. And 14 was in the general case, 15 was in the case where you were in a historic district. Can you kind of set it up for us? Tell us what that was all about.
Right. So without going into the details of the actual case, The background is that the ADA provides, and Massachusetts state law as well, provide for the ability for homeowners to make certain accommodations to their properties to accommodate various needs that might be had. The classic example of that is putting a ramp in that might otherwise violate the zoning rules. But there are other forms of accommodation that are not explicitly covered. And we were in a dicey position collectively because there was very little guidance in state law. There's very little guidance in prior case law to know exactly how a, a, a disagreement between a homeowner, their neighbors, and the town ought to be resolved in the case where someone wishes to uh, add what they believe is a necessary, make what they believe is the necessary modification to their property in order to accommodate the needs of a disabled individual who is residing there. And so these warrant articles were introduced to formalize the rules by which such a determination could be made.
And I want to be clear to the viewers, typically on warrant articles like this, I, as a town meeting member by nature of being the state rep, vote, but typically stay on the sidelines. In this case, I didn't. In this case, I spoke passionately, taking a side. Nevertheless, we're going to have this conversation here because I think as adults we can do that. Um, what was the tension? What was the perspective of the two sides? Simplified, ignoring lots of details, just for the viewers to understand what's the debate.
The debate, if you can oversimplify it to, and I'll say this up front, this is probably a slightly unfair oversimplification, but I think it will help people understand. It really boiled down to whether you viewed the problem as one of disability rights with the zoning component or zoning rights with the disability component. And that's really at how it boiled down. And the question is, if there's a disability, do you start from the perspective of disability mitigation or accommodation, and then fan out from that into understanding how the community may or may not get involved in terms of being aware of changes that are going to be made, the opportunity for various commissions to offer advice on how the construction would take place, or whether you start from the idea that this is a well understood zoning process with the zoning board of appeals and the like, and that disability is a factor, perhaps a trump card in the process, in the same way that the Dover conditions for educational development fall into that standard, but that you still follow the existing process with these additional weights being added to at various decision points.
I thought that oversimplification was really elegant, and I hadn't heard it said exactly that way, and it provides a little clarity for me. Um, what I observed was, on the one hand, the Oates motion, the motion from the petitioner said people with disabilities are entitled to privacy, and because they're entitled to privacy, the neighbors don't have anything to add, and so it should be a fully administrative process wherein the family of the person with disability apply to the town, the capital T town, and then essentially privately, without public input, the decision is made if the accommodation is appropriate and safe, and then the person goes and does it, and the neighbor finds out, when the construction crew shows up. Uh, that's not typical in Brookline. Most of the time, when someone wants to change their home, specifically affecting the outside of their home, affecting the sort of the bubble. There's a public process where there are, planning board and ZBA, and the public gets to speak and see the plans ahead of time, and there's a bit of a negotiation about what ultimately happens. And I think that's, is this a disability issue that has to go through zoning, or is this a zoning issue that involves disabilities? Really does a nice job of encapsulating that. So
Right,
the
and the way that the way that it plays out in a lot of cases, and where the rubber really hits the road, is around the details of the specific accommodation, whatever they might be. I mean, an oversimplification again might be you need a lift to be placed in on the side of your house in order to lift somebody from the first floor to the second floor. And
Kind
it
of
turns out
an
that they're
at-home elevator.
at an at-home elevator, and you've decided for your own benefit that the best place to put that would be here, and your neighbor thinks, I don't mind you putting in a lift, but could you put it 6 feet to the right, and therefore will change my sight lines for whatever. And is there an opportunity in that process for that dialogue to happen in a controlled way? And I think one of the concerns that had been expressed during the process was that the Oates motion, as originally proposed, would essentially swing the balance of decision making entirely to the side of the person with a disability to make all those decisions in the context of the town. And there were many people who thought, no, I have no objection to the accommodation. I would just like to be able to decide whether there are options that might be equally effective, that would have lesser impact on the environment.
And so this is two different sets of complex law. Thankfully, Mark Penzel, David Pollack, Dick Benka put in an inordinate amount of time putting together essentially an alternative proposal, one that was zoning focused rather than disability rights focused. And it gave town meeting an opportunity to express a preference about two different ways to view the same problem. I will say I have an opinion, but both are valid. Both are reasonable sort of worldviews and ways to start. And so town meeting decided. And what did town meeting decide?
Town meeting decided, and this I believe was actually the closest vote in the entire town meeting. It needed to pass by a majority, and it
I'm going
failed.
to interrupt you. The
The
decision of which
amendment.
motion to use needed to pass by a majority. Then whatever was chosen needed to pass by two-thirds. But I'm sorry,
Right.
go
And
ahead.
what happened was the choice to go back to that oversimplification, the choice to embrace the zoning focused alternative failed by a vote of 132 opposed and only 92 were in favor, which is actually quite a close vote for a town meeting. And then the original motion, the petitioner's motion, actually it has been amended slightly, but fundamentally the original motion passed by a vote of 174 to 43.
I
And
think that indicates that many town meeting members had a preference, but definitely wanted something.
yes, I would agree, and
I'd
I
rather
think
have a
that.
burger than a taco, but I'm eating dinner.
And I think that was borne out in the debate at town meeting. I recall very few, if any, conversations that thought this was a bad idea. Everyone simply was trying to make the resulting law and accommodations that would to our processes that would ensue the most appropriate to address situations like this in the future.
So I want to move on. We passed a bylaw that proposed by Anthony Ishak, a former town meeting member, to restrict where you can possess a firearm in the town of Brookline. Uh, what's that all about?
So there's a concern. I would say that Brookline has had some concern about the where you can carry firearms in the past. We've debated this question about public events and public streets and the like, and particularly in the context of the recent Supreme Court decisions that have amended our general understanding of what municipalities are allowed to do. But one of the carve outs in the Bruin decision appears to be, although I think it has not really been litigated yet very extensively, that it's sensitive locations, and one of the examples of a sensitive location was a place where you might get drunk. Um, uh, so is a place that it is possible for a municipality to restrict the carrying of firearms. And so Mr. Ishak proposed a warrant article that would amend our bylaws to do just that, and along the way identified the places where healthcare is performed. And there's a debate about precisely what constitutes healthcare delivery. Does going and getting your flu shot at CVS count as healthcare delivery? And I think it's pretty clear from the discussions that that was not intended to be covered, but a clinic, a minute clinic where people are being treated for a wide variety of medical conditions would count. And as it went through the process of review by the advisory committee and other bodies, it became clear that the original proposal was far too broad to really be effectively enforced within Brookline, because of the fact that Brookline is so dense in terms of its bars and doctors' offices and the like, that there are essentially almost no facilities in town for which there's a healthcare clinic or a bar that has parking that is unique to that particular facility. And so the way the legislation was originally written, it would have made it impossible for someone to be driving to a business that was not a firearm or a healthcare setting and bring their firearm, because they wouldn't be able to park in that particular parking lot. And we knew that that would not pass muster legally. And so we amended that legislation to remove those restrictions. And the resulting bylaw passed unanimously with only 9 abstentions.
And that's one of those that I was a little bit surprised about, the vote count, not the outcome. And it came on the heels of the state legislature, passing a substantial firearm reform last session, including restricting where one can take firearms at the state level. For example, you can no longer take your firearm with you to vote. And so this Brookline proposal sort of expands that area. And who knows, perhaps like many other things Brookline Town Meeting has done, that will eventually be taken up by the state legislature, that expansion. I want to talk about 2 warrant articles together, 18 and 19. Warrant Article 18 was to reduce the use of single-use plastic packaging. I'm thinking about like when you get your food to go or you get a doggy bag. And warrant Article 19 was about single-use plastic bags. Both of those items already had restrictions in Brookline, and that was an effort led by Nancy Heller a long time ago. I don't know, 10 or 15 years ago. And these were modifications. So I think it's easiest just to talk about them together. They were debated together.
Right. The so the big, I mean, I think that these are largely non-controversial warrant articles. Brookline has been a leader in terms of having restrictions on the use of plastic bags in a variety of contexts, and and plastic packaging in general. And most of this is just to clarify and bring up to date based on changes that might have existed in the manufacture of plastic bags and the like, so that the bylaw most reflects the facts on the ground, if you will. And so there are a few trends that have been seen, particularly in the form of takeout food from restaurants, that were viewed as something that needed to be addressed. And so the classic example is you go into a restaurant, you get takeout. Takeout comes with a half a dozen plastic bags with little single-use napkins and salt and pepper and some plasticware. And you come home and you throw those things in a drawer in your kitchen because you sit down at your dining room table and you eat on your own food, and you eat with your own utensils. And so the idea is, no, I mean, just tell the restaurant that they don't have to provide utensils. And in fact, they can't provide utensils unless the customer asks for them. And to that end, in fact, when you're using DoorDash or the like, it should just be easier for the delivery service to grab something on the way out if the customer requested it. And most of those delivery services already provide the option to ask for that. The other issue is that, unbeknownst to most people in this town, it was certainly unbeknownst to me until this warrant article was proposed. The black plastic containers that have the little circular recycling arrow on the back of them, which look like perfectly recyclable plastic, is not generally recyclable, not because of its manufacture, but simply because of its blackness, which makes it hard for it to participate in through the sorting and scanning and recycling process. And so we wanted to make clear, if you're a food service provider, you have to provide your utensils you have to provide your food in a serving container that is recyclable in Brookline. Um, and then everything else on that particular bylaw, I think, was largely technical. And then in warrant article 19, it mostly was around changing the definition of a reusable plastic checkout bag to align with the terminology that has recently been came from Massachusetts legislation. It has very little actual effect, I think, on the day-to-day activities of any particular store, although it does change the size of a store that is subject to this particular rule. It eliminates the exemption based on the size of the store.
So it used to be that small mom and pop shops were exempt, and sometime soon they will no longer be exempt, and everybody's going to
Right.
have to get used to that idea.
And
Um,
my understanding is that the proponents of this have been in touch with, numerous stores to both on the restaurant side and on the mom and pop side. And there was no. I mean, these kinds of bylaws often get some attention from the business community at town meeting. And there was none of that this time around. I think these are largely uh, well understood changes.
Attention to the business community brings us to our next discussion. That's warrant article 20, foie gras. The long story short is a citizen petition to prohibit the sale either in restaurants or in grocers of foie gras was proposed. And it certainly drew plenty of attention from the business community and the community at large.
Right. So foie gras is uh, is considered by many to be one of the most horrific aspects of a relatively brutal industrial food chain that exists in this country. So there are many communities across the country, although not in Massachusetts yet. Oh, I mean, as of a couple days ago now, Brookline, um, that have already outlawed the sale of foie gras on the reasons primarily of animal cruelty. Um, I think it falls. It's similar to bans that Brookline imposed over the last few years around fur, around the treatment of traveling circus animals and the like. This one probably has more actual impact on merchants in town because there were a few merchants that were selling foie gras. It was a relatively small number of merchants, but it's not zero. And in the case of Lamora, the restaurant, popular restaurant on Route 9, the owner there spoke passionately at town meeting in opposition to this warrant article, in part because he has a popular foie gras item on his menu. At the end of the day, town meeting decided, I would say generally overwhelmingly. I think the vote was 174. No, I'll have to look it up. I'm losing my screen. 114 to 79. Um, in favor of this particular article, and so the sale of foie gras will be banned. A couple of merchants had been reached out to, had been exploring vegan or vegetarian substitutes for foie gras in menus that they have, and didn't find that it was going to be a big issue. There were a couple of businesses that are going to be affected by this, and I think it remains to be seen what the impact will actually be on their business.
And it's one of those things where most people have foie gras never or almost never, but it has its aficionados. I want to move forward. We've got just a few minutes left. I want to talk about, if possible, warrant articles 28 and 29 together. They sound like they have nothing to do with each other, but they have some similarities. They were both resolutions, and so they don't change any bylaw. It's a statement by town meeting about its values. 28 was a commitment to democracy, and 29 was support for transgender, non-binary, and gender diverse people, brought forward by different petitioners, debated at different times. Um, is it unusual for town meeting to express its opinion in resolutions?
It's not unusual for town meeting to express its opinion in resolutions. And in fact, there's a meta debate that happens at almost every town meeting about whether town meeting should do it. And town meeting always does it. And town meeting always does it because it believes that that's one of the legitimate forms for influencing public opinion and national opinion. And you see it in the form of resolutions, and you see it in the form of what might seem at the time to be relatively narrow focused bans, such as the one we were just talking about, foie gras, or earlier cigarettes, or the likes. It often seems to many people like Sisyphus rolling a rock up a hill. What's the point of doing this? And in many cases, it turns out to be that adding those expressions and adding those votes either starts a campaign or helps perpetuate a campaign that it results in public change. In this particular case, I think both of these articles, although you say they don't seem to be the same, in the debate for both of them, in the run up to town meeting and at town meeting, it was clear, at least to this observer, that both of those would not have been on our ballot this time if the present Trump administration hadn't been taking so many stands that were just in opposition to the values of the majority of the population of Brookline and the population of town meeting. And so the examples of the deportations without due process, or I think in a large part the impetus for warrant article 28, and then the well-known antipathy that the administration has for transgender, non-binary, and gender diverse people in the form of, you know, renaming things, pushing against trans athletes and the like, or the climate has changed such that there's this chilling effect nationally, and the petitioners in this case and town meeting, in terms of overwhelming support for both of these warrant articles, wanted to make the statement that the town believes in democracy. The town believes in due process. The town believes in supporting the rights of marginalized members of the population. And I think that's something that when town meeting does it and speaks eloquently about it, it can have an impact.
Thank you, Dennis. There were other warrant articles that were debated and passed or rejected this town meeting, but we never go over all of them. We try to hit the highlights, and I think we did a great job in our second of a two-part series about the May and June 2025 town meeting, which I think was a success. It took a fourth night. They don't often take a fourth night, but there didn't seem to be a whole lot of grumbling about that, and some celebration when it was over. In any case, town meeting will meet again in November, and I have no doubt we will bring you or someone like you back to talk about that town meeting then.
But I can interject. We have a second for one. When the next town meeting rolls around, if any member of your audience is interested in watching the debate unfold prior to town meeting, come to the advisory committee's website, come to the town's website. You'll see listings for these articles. You can get involved. We'd like to hear from the public. I have started maintaining personally a website called brookline.info, where you can find You can sort by warrant article and see when each committee is going to be taking it up, and get links to the agendas and the like. And I encourage people to take advantage of these services, because I think that town meeting works best when the public participates.
I think that's great too. And again, thank you, folks. Thanks for watching Brookline Interactive Group. We're out of time, and we will see you again next week.